Jacksonville. The child was born and couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The weekend was on Election Day weekend, the 3rd of November 2018, as we beam from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is an interesting weekend, as it always is, when we are on the eve of a major election, and all of these elections have been around long enough to note that all of these elections are, quote-unquote, major elections. Midterm elections, of course, are notorious for having lower turnout. Part of that reason is that people are programmed to turn out for national elections roughly about 50%, some states are more, 60 or 70% of the people turn out in the national election, which are held every 4 years. Midterms every 2 years. This particular midterm, 2018, is a midterm that is a little bit different in that there has been a lot of hype, and primarily because of DJ Trump, otherwise known as the president. He graces, as they say, newspaper covers, various cable and scenery networks that are beaming. And, of course, now we have social media. He has headquartered himself at Twitter. An interesting situation. We've always favored Twitter over Facebook from a personal standpoint. Don't spend as much time on Twitter. Probably spend about 30 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, sometimes 15 minutes a day on various Twitter feeds. Of course, you'll get us at the Boston Red Twitter feed, a little bit more there than in the past, that we are retweeting basically articles from various sources, and some of those articles are from Facebook that people post, and then we put it to the Twitter account. We also have a technical Twitter, at Cranston Salt, where you can go there and find technical information. A lot of political information there, and it warps its way over to Facebook on some of our feeds. This is kind of a little promotion here for the program. We'll throw it right in. Various outlets. YouTube has been very responsive to us lately. We'll give them a proverbial shout out. I don't know if people giving shout outs anymore. The iHeart network, which is expanding to Medico, and Stitcher. Stitcher is a very important mobile application network. Spreaker, the old blog talk radio. I guess they're trying to reinvent themselves. Not exactly certain as to where they are going. They are, of course, part of a Speaker. The ownership is the same. The network's a little different. Primarily, the only difference is that the blog talk, you can still host a talk show type format. And we hope to do this. I'm not sure we'll be able to do it before the election. We probably will have to do it after the election, but we'll get it done nonetheless. And we some notes on our programming here. We have a special on polling. We call it Le Politique. And it'll be coming up this weekend. We also have from our analytics unit called Numbers Man, the open source report. It'll be, this week in economics, and we will have a technical presentation from the open source report, where we'll talk a little bit about technology. We'll talk some about that a blocking tool we just discovered today that you can use to find out if a message on Twitter is legitimate or not legitimate. One of the things here. But we'll get on with the broadcast here from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Incidentally, we will have Jerry Pippin in 2012 midterm. We'll replay that this weekend. So we have a lot of things to do, and we are about 12 hours later than we normally do this program. It's about 1746 now. We usually do this program at 0500 in the morning on Saturday morning. But nonetheless, we are here. We'll start with Uncle Karl Rove. We don't want to slight him. He's writing in the Wall Street Journal as usual. Republicans show strength in early voting. The final week of the midterm elections is always brutal. Candidates rush from event to event. Staffers debate the campaign's closing message. Fundraisers scramble for the last dollar. Volunteer big supporters to turn out. Get out to vote efforts now assume special importance. And one time, get out to vote efforts were pretty much confined to the Democratic Party, which was at the time more of a grassrootsy type of party. That changed, however, in more recent years at the election of 2000, for those that remember it, that involved Albert Gore of Tennessee and G.W. Bush of Texas. Albert Gore started his campaign off going down the Mississippi River, knowing that this was in August, knowing that people were on holiday. And his campaign, of course, is run by several campaign managers, but the winning campaign was run by none the less than Donna Brazile. Donna Brazile happens to be one of the great campaign practitioners about, and she ran a very good campaign. But no matter how good your campaign is, you can't guard against theft. And that's what happened in Florida to the 2000 campaign. And then what we started to have at the 2004 campaign, the Republican Party moved more into a grassroots type of turnout of Republicans. And then, of course, in 2008, as they say, the gloves came off. Barack Obama, the king of literally turnout campaigns, turned it out. He won states like Indiana that had not been won by a Democrat since, I believe, LBJ. And he got North Carolina. I think Bill Clinton carried North Carolina in one of his campaigns. Have to look that one up. It's been a while there. And then, of course, his re-election campaign, the same playbook was there. But the campaign of 2016 was very interesting in that DJ Trump, through various machinations, mobilized a very unusual base of people, some of these people that had not voted, very similar to what Jesse Ventura a candidate in the upper Midwest state of Minnesota was able to do. In other words, he expanded the circumference of the pool of voters. And in states like Pennsylvania, that was very important. And Wisconsin, and to a certain extent, Michigan. Two of those states, and also Pennsylvania, because of the way the legislature was set up there, gerrymandering. The word came in our political lexicon, voter suppression. In Michigan, you had voter suppression. In Wisconsin, under Boss Walker, you had also voter suppression. And in Pennsylvania, very important there, Ohio, some of those states. And then if you went, say, for instance, to North Carolina, a lot of voter suppression in North Carolina. The Democrats were, since 2016, able to claw back the governor's chair in North Carolina. So little different things are going on there. Thus, you have the turnout. This election, incidentally, is a nationalized election by DJ Trump, otherwise known as the president, based upon his supporters. And we'll talk about this in the broadcast here. Let's go on with Uncle Carl to get out the vote efforts. Now assume a special importance. Careful of planning, precise targeting, months of preparation, vast amounts of volunteer hours. I would pay off in early absentee ballots. Absentee ballots used to be the mainstay of the Republican Party. Now we have early voting. Saw it rear up in places like Arizona. They call it convenience voting at the time. And you hear more and more about early voting. It used to be the absentee ballots where you go pick them up at some courthouse or whatever. And now, of course, you have early voting. So in Florida, very important for seniors, very important for African Americans, as it was there. But going on here, but initial reports are good for Republicans. Last week, the NBC News found GOP-affiliated voters had surpassed Democrat-affiliated voters in ones in early voting states in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Montana, Tennessee, and Texas, all of which have key races for the Senate governor, or both. Nevada is the only state with critical Senate race in which they reported a Democratic advantage there. That's Harry Reid's turnout machine. That accurate but incomplete. As of Tuesday night, Nevada's early voting results showed a 3% swing towards Republicans from the last election of early voting, since Democrats carried the state by 2.4 in 2016. The GOP looks to be in the hunt for the state Senate and the gubernatorial race. More so on the Ducey in the gubernatorial race. The Senate race is still fairly close. Early voting also suggests the GOP mimic gains in Arizona, as Monday night 464,491 Republicans had voted, compared with 356,100 Democrats, 252,810 independents, and other early voters. This represents a 5.4 swing to Republicans in a state they carried by 3.6 in 2016. The good news for GOP, again, Ducey and Senate hopeful McSally. McSally was way behind. Of course, she had a primary, and their senator, the Democrat, the young woman, Farbrad, they've spent millions of dollars defining her or knocking down her favorables. In Florida, Rick Scott, he is the current governor of Florida, and the racist DeSantis also look to benefit from early voting. As of Tuesday night, Republicans cast 41.9% of early voting and absentee ballots, as to 40.1 by Democrats represents a 3-point swing towards Republicans. Now, this is in the state, Florida, that DJ Trump barely was able to eke out 1.2 points in 2016. Now, Florida under Jeb Baby Bush had been a reliable Republican standard, at least in a gubernatorial seat. Now, they've had senators from there, from Red Pepper, Claude Pepper, who was in the House of Representatives out of Jacksonville. And that's the same place that you will hear our song coming out of that area with Mr. Kennedy there, Stetson Kennedy, and his work against racism. He was very successful. In fact, he destroyed the Klan in Georgia, took away their charter. These other resorts and others from Indiana, Montana, Tennessee, and Texas. At one time, Texas, of course, you go back to Lyndon Johnson, the last time that the Democrats actually controlled the state of Texas, and it had been conservative from time to time. That's the history of Texas. And if you go from that history to the present-day governors there, the Democrats have not been in office. Ann Richards was in office in Texas, but it's a weak gubernatorial situation there in Texas. I'm trying to think of the last Democratic senator from Texas. I think it was Lloyd Bentsen. He ran as a vice president at one time. Of course, John Connally was a senator from Texas that was wounded, the late John Connally, in the Kennedy assassination era. So Texas has had a marginal situation in terms of Democrats there. Now, Beto O'Rourke is a different type of Democrat. He would be more in the mold of the Republican, I'm trying to think of his name, Ralph Yarborough, was today would be a liberal Democrat. He was a liberal Republican, and you did have some of those at one time out there in various places. In fact, that was part of the reason John F. Kennedy was down in Texas. They had the Yarborough faction and the Johnson faction, the Yarborough faction being the more progressive faction. But LBJ is remembered by his Great Society program, the Civil Rights Act, the Opening Housing Act. LBJ was a civil rights president. They tried to slander him with Vietnam. But Vietnam is a history that has disappeared, and did disappear at the conclusion of the war in the early 70s. And when the last copter left Saigon. But we have the historic Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, which the Republicans have tried to gut. And this is, by and large, of the Republicans, when they took over the Congress, we had, under Bill Clinton, a fellow from Georgia named Newt Gingrich, who happened to have a PhD in economics, taught economics, put a contract on America. So this right-wing tendency that you see now has been around for a very, very long time, and it's ugly head. During the Clinton administration, you had militias out there, many more militias than today. Now, the militias you see today are a little bit different. You have the white supremacist gangs. An article, if we have time, I'll read a paragraph from the New York Times talking about how these gangs are solidified, and of course, again, they have so-called easy pickings, a Texas politician once told me, during the DJ Trump administration. So this is the background that we have when we go into, let's say, for instance, Indiana. Very close race there. Tennessee, we don't know. We'll get to some of the current polling. In fact, we'll go there now. Let me just finish Uncle Carl over here. Out. Trends favor Republicans and may not continue. The Republican get out the vote machine could falter. Democratic numbers could improve. Independents could break decisively against the GOP. Soft Republicans could cast protest ballots. And that's one of the questions in many of the in Pennsylvania and these suburban locations. diminishing the party's apparent improvements. Moreover, GOP early vote advantages could turn out to be fool's gold. Well, that does happen sometimes. We've seen that before in the 2016 election as we were monitoring it. The early voting patterns favored Hillary Clinton of New York. It'd be an interesting point. Also, we had two candidates from New York. Usually, if you had two candidates from New York, it would be all over the press. And people in the West at one time would not have voted for them, like in Montana. But DJ Trump hailed out of New York, a born and bred New Yorker. And without expanding the universe of the Republicans, may be transferring votes from Election Day to earlier absentee ballots without expanding the universe of GOP voters. Republicans should not take anything for granted. Instead, keep operating at flank speed. Well, the last few sentences, Uncle Carl is actually speaking factually here. One of the reasons we feature him, although he's no doubt a master of political chicanery, one of the unfound masters of his trade. There's no doubt about that. He does know the political landscape. He's known it in the past. Spent 2 hours once with Uncle Carl in the 80s trying to convince him socialism was the path. Of course, we failed. But nonetheless, you have to give Uncle Carl his proper due here. In his last sentences, he is hedging his bets, so to speak. I wonder if Uncle Carl is shorting the Republicans on this election at some of the betting sites. Nonetheless, to the polling here, this is what we have from November the 3rd. In the state of Missouri, this is a Missouri Scout poll. It's tied all up, Hockley and McCaskill, 47-47. Out of California, Dianne Feinstein. This is Stanford, excuse me. Wait a minute. Sanford. Anyway, YouGov poll. I hadn't seen them poll with YouGov. Has Feinstein by a 7. That election is getting much closer. De Leon at 29. She's at 36. The St. Petersburg poll there, out of St. Petersburg, has Scott ahead by 1 point there. And in the governor's race, they have Gillum up by 2 points. In another out of Stanford, the governor's race has Newsom up by double digits, 19 over Cox. Cox is now resting back at about 34%. California 45, Porter up by 2 over Walters. We'll give the Friday, I almost said scorecard here. In the state of Nevada, this is their race here. This is Gravis. Now, Gravis is a Republican polling house. Has Rosen up 2 over Heller. Heller was supposed to be the most endangered Democrat. In the state of Tennessee, this is East Tennessee State University has it tied up. Blackburn and Brisbane. In the state of Ohio, Gravis again has Brown up by 9. Emerson, we'll go to them in a minute. In Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin by 9 there. In this is a Stockton University poll out of Jersey. But then there's up by 12. He should be in double digits in Jersey. Morning Call out of Pennsylvania. We just let's see. Casey up by 14. Casey's been in double digits in Pennsylvania. Murphy up by 23. That is a Senate race in Connecticut. In Vermont. Actually, that's interesting. That's a Senate race. Oh, Bernie Sanders up by 36. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll has Kemp and Abrams tied up. And the Emerson poll had Kemp up by 2. So that race is a dead heap in the state of Georgia. In Minnesota, the governor's race there, Waltz, the Democrat, up by 8 over Johnson. 49 to 41. Another Emerson poll out of Iowa has the Republican Reynolds up by 4. University of Iowa poll has Hubbard up by 4. So throw the coin up there. In Connecticut, Stanislavski is up by 2 over Lamont. I've seen Lamont up also, so very close race there. The Gravis poll at the same time has Lamont up by 9. A lot of swing going on in that one. In Arizona, this is ABC 15 poll. Ducey up by 18. He's been pretty much in double digits all along. The Gravis poll, Cordray, this is Ohio, up DeWine by 5. That's a little more than we've seen before in Ohio. East Tennessee poll, Lee up by 12. That must be a gubernatorial. Know nothing about Lee. In Wisconsin, Evans up by 5 over Boss Walker. That's an Emerson poll. Emerson's doing a lot of polling here. A morning call poll, Wolf up by 21. That's never been a race. Tafanga group poll out of South Carolina. Big Masters up by 15. Vermont, Scott up by 10 in the state of Vermont. It's a governor's contest. Alaska grabbing up by 1 over Young. Oh, Young's been around 48-49. A long-serving representative there in Alaska. California. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Hockley versus Levine. Levine up by 7. And some of these others here are Iowa 1. Frankenster up by 7. And that's the New York Times. Both polls. Emerson has him up, has Frankenster up by 12. Iowa 2. Lopestack up by 13. Another Iowa district here, Exney up by 1 over Young. And this involves a racist King. King up by 9. That is in Iowa 4. And New York 2. Wait a minute here. Yeah, strange. Collins is a Republican up by 7. This is WHEC TV. Dixie Strategies. And from the Washington Post there, Waxton is up by 11 over Barbara Comstock, who probably will more than likely be history. And that is the polling the way we see it. Let's get to this Emerson poll here. Tight governor's races in Georgia, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Democrats look to pick up 2 House seats in Iowa. Now in Georgia, between Kemp and is up by 2 points over Stacey Abrams. The Libertarian Metz has 1 percentage point. According to this poll, Emerson poll, 2% are still undecided. Iowa candidate, if they don't reach 50%, there will be a runoff. And they're talking about the devil will go down to Georgia. That will be on the 6th of December. And very hard to say if there will be a runoff or not. It depends on when you get 47, 49. Very difficult to say. In the state of Wisconsin, Tommy Evans has 51. He's the the superintendent of public instruction, or whatever they call it in Wisconsin, to 46 for Boss Walker. Tammy Baldwin, she has 53% of the vote. Luke Meyer, whatever, 44%. Independents in the governor's race are breaking for Evans. This is important in the state of Wisconsin, 51 to 40. In Iowa, races within 4 points with incumbent Kim Reynolds, she was appointed when the other one left. And Fred Hubbell, he's at 45 with 5% undecided. Democrats are looking to pick up 2 House seats in Iowa. Abby Faulkner, is at 53, and this is his Ron Bloom character at 41. 2% undecided. He's been in close races before. Cindy Axney and David Young at 46. That's a 1-point race. 6% are undecided in the state of Iowa. 2% undecided in Georgia. And the margin of error, incidentally, in Georgia is 3.7. Name recognition, the favorables, I'm assuming this is in Georgia, 48% for DJ Trump, 47% unfavorable. Just a 1-point advantage. Kemp is at 46%, 42% unfavorable. And so is Abrams. She's at 46%, 42% unfavorable rate in the state of Georgia. In Iowa, we won't go back over those races in the state of Iowa. DJ Trump, incidentally, has a 48% favorable rate in Iowa. I was very surprised about that. And 48% unfavorable, so he's 50-50 man. Hubbell is at 45 and 39 unfavorable. Reynolds is at 47 and 42. Her unfavorables are actually higher than Hubbell's. She hasn't been able to do very much since she's been there. Anyway, she's a caretaker. In the state of Wisconsin, they have Tommy Evans up. I've seen other polls had Boss walk up by 1. Name recognition, DJ Trump is underwater in Wisconsin. He's at 44%, which is basically his national situation. 52% unfavorable. Tammy Baldwin, 49%. Her favorables are higher than they've ever been. And 44% unfavorable. Volkmeyer is at 40%. Her favorables 43% unfavorable. Boss Walker, his unfavorables are very high, 50% unfavorable. They have 45% favorable. Now he's 1 point higher than DJ Trump, but his unfavorables, well, no, it's only at 50%. You can see why the boss is having some problems there. Let me just get through some other things here. And we have this incidentally up. This is 10,000 Twitter accounts have been removed for as they say, sending out fake information. Removal will represent an early win for flooding efforts by the Democratic Congressional Committee, with the prevalence of misinformation campaigns have so far been moderate in the run-up to the congressional elections. Twitters include one that discourages Democratic men from voting, saying that would drown out the voices of women. That's an interesting one. The DCC has developed its own system for identifying and reporting malicious automated accounts. Now, this is the one we posted up there. It's called the Huxley Boat Meter, developed at the University of Indiana. Allows users to identify automated accounts known as bots and analyze how they spread information. We put this up on our Facebook situation. The Democratic Committee, using a group of contractors and partners to identify them. They include Robot Labs, a firm whose website says it developed technology capable of detecting bots, and so forth and so on. So they're in the war to get the bots. We'll put a link to this on, and let's go back here. Trump has been trumpeting his economy and racist robocalls in the state of Georgia. This is incidentally from Reuters. Control of both the House and current domination by the Republicans of 34 seats. Those are some of the things called down ballot at stake here. America's booming, he said. Well, and also inflation's starting to boom too. Some of the major manufacturers, so-called staple goods, that would be cereals, etc., are boosting their prices. So in other words, that 3% rate will disappear. So this is what DJ Trump was trying to, largest tax overhaul since the 80s. Yeah, that's when the deficit started, when it slashed the corporate rates from 21 from 35. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha, reported profits going up. He's buying back. We'll have more of this on Numbers Man. Democrats want to invite the caravan after caravan. He's lying about that. There's no Democrats invited in the caravan. Joe Lunchbox Biden was in Ohio for Cadre. He used to be the first director of the Consumer Protection Agency, the house that Elizabeth Warren built. President Obama was in Florida campaigning for Gillum. So they've all been around in Indiana. This Mike Braun, who is challenging Senator Donnelly. Trump was on the stage with Bobby Knight. Oh boy. Go get him, Donald. This is a strange one. Well, Bobby Knight hadn't heard much from him. Of course, he's been in retirement for a very, very long time. Interest in elections has been unusually high this time around. 27 states plus the District of Columbia recorded more early votes at this point in the campaign than they did in 2014. That's not unusual there for that to happen. This is according to the election project at the University of Florida. We'll get that information for you for Monday Morning Quarterback. So the president, criticized him for not doing enough, was in Florida, in Miami, and also on to Georgia for Stacey Abrams. And some other information here. The voter ID, this is a form of suppression in Florida. Brian Kemp, he's also the supervisor of elections there, suppressing Democrats' votes by strict ID. A federal judge ordered the state to allow some 3,000 recently naturalized citizens to vote after their registration had been put on hold. If they're naturalized, they should be able to vote. The race is neck and neck. Voter turnout will be critical. This is from the Georgia State political scientist Bonnet Bailey. Obama could energize the base. I think in Georgia the base is energized, but it's been very close in Georgia, turning the state more purple. Jimmy Carter has been out on Huskings. The final week of campaign has also seen a strat in violence. Yes, we have had that. DJ Trump complained is taking him off the front pages. The FBI says recovered a suspicious package. That should be in Air Tom Saya. So in other words, those packages still making their rounds. In Virginia, this was a third visit by DJ Trump. In Fremont says Senator Meacham. Meacham, of course, is a popular former governor there. He succeeded the dean of the Senate, one of the long-serving senators from West Virginia. And so I know Trump's coming soon is making an impact. That's from Jim Hoyt. He's the chair of the Morgan County Democratic Party. That's in Northeast Virginia, West Virginia. Like other Democrats in the state, he expects Meacham to win. I also expect Joe to bring it home. Joe has ran a lot of races. Morsi was way behind at one time in that race. We're thinking of Senator Byrd there. Senator Byrd, of course, being a pillar. Let me see what time it is here. I'm not doing too badly on time. See what else we have, as they say, in our house. This is something the political science professor sent over. Donald Trump exploit long-term economic distress to fuel his election victory. That's a study found that. We'll look at that study. Been 2 weeks just before the election. A sudden wave of campaign spending was unleashed. That usually happens with these super PACs in the Rust Belt. Brand new ads designed to stir anger at the Democratic ticket. Much of the late voting spent centered on classic economic populism, rising healthcare costs, the pervasive feeling that inside politicians are out to serve themselves. Well, that is the case in many of these Republicans that have been around for a very long time. The insidious billionaire backed push helped lock up the election for DJ Trump, who swept Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania to win the Electoral College. One of the problems in all three of those states, voter suppression on a boss walker in Wisconsin, in Michigan, Gateway Snyder, who is exiting, and in Pennsylvania because of the Republican-dominated legislature there. But what really motivated voters in these states is a puzzle that has wrought political observers. The question continues to cast a shadow of how the Democratic Party should reimage itself and appeal to voters going in future elections. Now, a research paper here from the Institute for New Economic Thinking, we'll append this one, today makes the case that Trump's artificially exploited long-term economic distress to clinch the presidential election. The paper challenged the popular conventional wisdom, which embraced by many pundits, that the 62.9 million who cast their vote for Trump were simply one-dimensional deplorables, motivated by racism, sexism, and xenophobia, rhetoric, and little else. Not exactly a correct way of placing it, period. There's always more for that, because we know that some of these people that voted for DJ Trump were actually people that voted for Barack Obama twice. And there is actually empirical evidence of that. The authors of Ferguson, Page, Rothschild, Chang, and Xi use a combination of figures from the National Election Study data along with aggregated data from congressional districts to paint a more complete picture. Trump spawns traditional Republican orthodoxy, promising to protect Medicare and Social Security while trading his fire at bipartisan consensus around trade, what they call free trade. Many voters confetted trade deals that hollowed out the country's manufacturing base and decades of stagnant wages, which increased immigration, seeing the issue as an intractable link. Trump spoke to this view, blaming immigrants and refugees for crime and terrorism. You don't hear any more about ISIS for economic hardships, national decline, a message that appeared to resonate in voters. First tried in the later 30s in Germany under somebody named Schicklgruber, the Hitler. Not only were major economic factors important, our analysis makes clear that the social and economics were intertwined both in the rhetoric of DJ Trump and the minds of voters. The study is careful not to claim that race and gender played no role in the election, noted that Trump absolutely mobilized anger over identity. This is called fascism, religion, and national origin. Previous attempts to use the ANES data to discern the connection between economic anxiety and Trump support have found little correlation. Previous papers relied almost entirely on the short-term, the ANES short-term economic questions, attributed questions, and other biases. The authors of a new Institute for Economic Thinking study incorporate open-end responses, which allowed voters to write out their own spontaneous response to broad questions rather than selecting a canned response. Well, the only problem here, remembering what they call objective tests, multiple choice tests, back in grading students' papers, it just takes longer. The open-ended answers, they argued, showed that social and economic factors were deeply connected for many voters, including critical voters who swung from Barack Obama to Trump, who went from supporting him, Obama, to not voting. Voting went from not voting in 2012 to backing Trump in 2016. Let me just speed this up a little bit here. Many word, of course, this has been around. Immigrants speaking a foreign language. That was a response probably 20 years ago. A lot of that has disappeared, and obviously depends on where people live. The office suggests that economic stagnation for entire regions of the country, particularly rural communities. Rural communities have literally had economic stagnation since the war on poverty in the 60s. It improved some, but it went back to business as usual. The answers to the survey showed how many individuals were for preference for Trump, also asserted there was no major difference between the parties, that healthcare costs were too high. One of the things that Trump promised to rectify. Voters rarely fitted into neat ideological, so-called moral boxes. A survey conducted by Reuters in 2016 showed that as many as a third of Hillary Clinton voters viewed African Americans more criminal than whites and more violent than whites, despite the candidates stressing anti-racist principles on the astute. Well, that's not unusual. That has been one of the things in the Democratic Party since the Klan ran around. The study repeatedly cited Hannah Arendt, alliance between the mob and capital, the idea that powerful elites exploit widespread economic discontent and channel anger away from economic reform towards social scapegoats. Well, there's no doubt about that. She was an interesting person. We've talked about her before. She was a right-wing, political theorist. Nonetheless, Trump harnessed economic distress to blame minorities, immigrants, for the nation's woes, the Koch brothers and others. And this is important to bring them out, connecting the anger about the economy and religion and ethnic minorities. Small set of super PACs, dark money. There's a lot of dark money out there. The open-ended ANES survey results also showed how widespread and pervasive perception that Clinton was corrupt. Well, yeah, no doubt about that. She was asked a question by Mr. Tapper. Was she corrupt? She didn't say anything. In contrast to Clinton, Trump's certainly attempt to position himself as an outsider. Well, he was an outsider. He had not run for office before. But he was corrupt. With two highly unpopular candidates, most distinctive personal traits there. And this whole idea, I don't know if they talk as much about fake news, but the election did offer some clues that Trump's xenophobic rhetoric was uniquely combined with a rejection of the business-centric consensus on trade and immigration. Well, yes, he threw out the red meat there. The trade unions had long opposed the North American so-called free trade. Now it's called a trade agreement. But it gives a little and it takes away a lot. The paper notes that future Democratic candidates should take heed that economic distress still motivates large swaths of the electorate. Well, they have done this. President Obama campaigned aggressively against NAFTA, marking Clinton as a cheerleader for NAFTA, no doubt. The same should be said about Bernie Sanders, and they finally brought Bernie up, relatively obscure candidate with little political resources, facing a virtual blackout in the media, who catapulted ahead of Clinton in several races, and would have won the nomination had not been for Clinton's O-line Boys and Girls Club is stealing the election from Bernie, and some outdated laws, as is New York, that Bernie couldn't appear there because he didn't join the Democratic Party soon enough. Lots of people feel completely left out from the recovery. There's a dual economy. People feel squeezed from the middle class. They don't know how they can send their children or kids to school. Ferguson said there is lots of poor people who should have voted Democrat but switched. That's not unusual. These were the so-called Reagan Democrats. The difference was, though, in 1980, there were sections of the working class were doing much better. But the layoffs in Detroit were coming. Of course, after Reagan got elected, the family farm was destroyed, and there were more layoffs. Reagan had recession after recession, almost lost the whole thing. So it was not as rosy. People did get tax cuts. The military grew. People that were in the military contractors benefited. And then you had the first President Bush. The economy rocked around in the late 80s and the start of the early 90s, and then came Bill Clinton. With a recession on his plate. But then you had the dot-com boom that kept America booming, as they say, into the latter days of Clinton's office. So you had unprecedented growth there. But the difference this time around is, and one of the key things to remember, the dot-com boom was something that originated in the middle-class sector. But the internet grew and grew and grew, and because of the massive amount of investment in it, also other businesses expanded their hiring pools. So unemployment went down. People were hired that had not been hired, but yet at the same time, Clinton had gutted the so-called social programs. Welfare, as we noted, rebranded it under things such as food subsistence programs, housing subsidies, and a lot of people actually went to work. But then came G.W. Bush and another hard time recession coming. Bush had some tax cuts, but Bush was fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The people are still in Afghanistan. So a lot of the money went out the window. So Bush and his economic programs caused a depression, which at that time, before the depression came upon people and their TV screens, Senator McCain was slightly ahead in the presidential race. He never led again. Barack Obama took off and literally just never looked back. And that was a turnout election that turned into a landslide election. And then you had the re-election of Barack Obama, but you had this enormous racist campaign, first by Hiroshimaana Clinton. And that is the reason why these voters were introduced to that. And, of course, it was reinforced by a Sarah Palin and company. So this is nothing new. DJ Trump just took those voters and added on to it some of the people that had actually voted for Barack Obama. It's that simple. This will do it for us. We'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback on a Monday morning. This is Old Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. Happy as a lark. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on a Sunday morning. Incidentally, our special program will continue. We'll be looking at several debates, La Politique, which will involve polling. We'll get into that study from the people from the economic, whatever they call themselves. and we'll have more information on that particular issue. Incidentally, people at the in Charlottesville have done some of the same type of studies with that national data set, national election studies data set by many people, New Economic Thinking operation there. And this was from the Intercept, so more progressive way of looking at it. We look at things from many different angles. We started out, of course, with DJ Trump. We didn't give the baseball scores, the baseball season is ended. The basketball scores today. We'll do all that on the Monday Morning Quarterback in some of our programs. Good day.